Okay, welcome back everyone to Traumatology. Today we will be discussing, for our final episode, what healing in trauma means. Welcome, Dr. Miller. How are you today?
I'm great, Rebecca. How are you?
Good, thank you. So it's the last episode, and I find this topic probably to be the most complex, maybe, the actual healing, because like we talked about with trauma as a definition, there is no universal way of thinking about trauma. And in the same light, there is no single healing path. Everyone has their unique journey to healing.
And I think that's, very important, again, around we would want that. Mm-hmm. Because if I say to you, this is the way to heal, go forth and heal, I probably have missed a really important piece. Who are you, right? In your lived experience. Tell me about who you are, what happened. Here's some things I might know, but you will know more than me in relation to what you need. I might just offer in, and you have to decide, is that safe? Is that respectful? Does it honor you? Can you take back your right to have choice? That's that self-determination piece. So it is really important that every person have a different healing story, even though there may be similarities and themes, which is something I looked at in my own research. But ultimately, there is no two stories that are exactly the same. And I think sometimes we want that. If we can just find that right story, if I just find that right TikTok, if I just find that right something, I'll be okay. The greater journey is to find the okay in who you are as a person as you come back through that experience and find the pieces of healing, but find yourself again.
When you say that in your research within the trauma work, that you found some commonalities and some themes, are you speaking to the self-determination role, or what other things did you find there?
Well, one of the first questions was just asking them about healing and trauma and things that they had done. And there were common themes. Some of it was safe people. And that didn't mean a professional either. Because for some people, the professional, the therapist, the whoever, was not necessarily a safe person. Mm-hmm. For some people, it was rekindling a relationship or having a partner, someone that really cared about them through the process, or a sibling or an extended family member, community member. It could have been a pet. It could have been finding a piece of information. It could have been walking more. It could have been accepting that they had gone through this experience and somehow, somewhere, maybe a colleague at work, honored that story somehow. And that helped them to heal. So there were things that people brought forward just in general around healing without looking at the role of self-determination. Mm-hmm. And some of those commonalities were basic things, and yet some were a lot different. So basic things could be part of healing was when they decided they needed to get out of bed every morning, that they had been hiding from the world. The impact had been so significant. Drinking too much, doing something that was unhealthy too much, choosing to change that, right? Making a choice that I need to begin, and I'm going to bring myself into that, just getting up, right? Or going to AA, or going to talk to someone about it. It was like that choice that somewhere in this story, they began to understand that this burden that they were living with, if they didn't find a way to somehow begin that choice to heal, that burden could have enough heaviness to, in some way stop them from living to their human potential. And you will hear that in stories of suffering. Mm-hmm. That there is a moment of clarity, there's a moment of something where the human spirit and its resiliency is strong. And we begin now to heal.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think it's really important that we identify that there maybe is no universal path, but there can certainly be some commonalities between the stories that we hear.
Mm-hmm. Yes, and I think when we are working on behalf of people, again, we have to watch our unconscious bias in this one, but we might go in thinking, oh, well, this is what that person will want, right? And I think you have to empty your mind, so to say, kind of open up your heart chakra and sit still and create safety and let the person enter in. And sometimes they'll show you the way around things they've tried for healing. It can be sometimes they've already had a medical appointment and let's say there's been some medications given to help them through a difficult time. And they might now be in a space of saying, I decided that I am going to not take my meds with the help of my medical team, of course, to get through that, but I feel there's other pieces I need. And they open up to talk about that and not to judge them in those decisions, right, is to support them. Okay, how can I support you in that? Do you want me, or do you want to have some kind of meeting with your medical practitioner, and we can talk about, is this, the right way, right time to make a decision like that, which you want to make? How do you make it and be safe and healthy? And then how do we provide you with other things, other supports, and honor that piece of information? Because in the research, the original question, because there were 3 questions, the first one was really just exploring the idea of healing around trauma. And lots of people made what I would call decisions to undo decisions that were made on behalf of them without them really feeling like they had a choice in the original decision.
Right.
Yeah.
So really just being there to offer guidance and walk alongside. Because a lot of the time, in your experience, since you've identified these patterns and themes of what might be helpful for people, it can also be an opportunity to offer that up. These types of things have helped people in the past. What do you think? Giving a lot of choice, autonomy, and collaboration in that process can often be a piece where mental health professionals can be a little bit more involved in that way, while remaining keeping that equitable relationship and that collaboration.
And I'll talk about research. I'll talk about, things I've learned along the way as a way of bringing in, right, sort of pockets, right, of some sort of knowledge, but never at the expense of who they are. And it's like a negotiation, but in any good negotiation, you want the person to be empowered, right, to really be strong in their choice. And that's where you sit back, right, and see if they're willing to come in and let you know what they need. And if they aren't, I'd be asking, what are you doing in that negotiation? Because if you come in sometimes too heavy-handed and this is what you need to do, and if you don't do, and research tells us, and it's like, okay, hold on, that research was done at a certain time with a certain group of people, so let's let the autonomy of this person, right, at this time decide if that works for them, and or how do we create a process so they can better understand if this might be something they want. And I think a lot of the lived experience data, so that came through the research in that first question, was that choice. Timing was a big piece in there too, because to be ready to make that choice, sometimes they needed more time than just the appointment that said, this is what you need to do, because this is what we do, and this is what research tells us we do. And there's a lot of vulnerability in coming into new experiences, new choices, when you've already had choice taken away from you around the impact of whatever had occurred.
Right. I think we've kind of touched on the uniqueness of the healing journey, but also how professionals and practitioners can offer some support in that process. We've kind of touched on the difficulty of saying this is what the healing journey is, because that doesn't exist. There is not one set path. There is not one size fits all. And we talk about healing and trauma work. But I was hoping that we could have this talk be more around what are some helpful considerations that people can help keep in mind that can kind of foster a sense of self-compassion when they're going through their own healing journey, or maybe supporting someone else in their healing journey. Particularly, this was inspired by an article by Healthline that we will also link in the description below. But to begin, I was wondering if you can speak to the idea that some people might have around trauma healing, that trauma is something to get over and move on from, versus seeing it as a journey with ebbs and flows. Like you mentioned, some things will do, some maybe self-care strategies will do a lot of good for people, but then they'll do something that kind of almost reverts that good stuff. So it really is a process that isn't linear. So how can you just kind of speak to that idea that trauma, you get over it or you bounce back from it, versus the journey?
Right. I think, like a lot of things in today's world, we are just looking to start and finish and get on with it, because we're socialized to see life in that way. And instead of the journey is the most important piece, a restorative piece with, the impact of trauma is to restore your vitality. which doesn't mean that you get rid of what has happened, once done, once said, once thought, once experienced. You're not just going to get rid of it, but it becomes integrated into who you become, and the healing becomes a part of that too, to release the burden somehow, which is that restorative piece. So the restorative is to restore the human spirit, is to let people find their capacity again, to support them to find safety in their body, in their soul, in their mind. And so restorative means that you bring to the table, right, resources and peoples and supports and knowledge and, it doesn't matter, ways of being and nature and, some connections to traditions and practices. And it's very multifaceted. And that's why, the healing around trauma is actually quite beautiful. It's eclectic. It's, it's monumental in many ways, because a person may enter into things that they've never even thought to integrate into kind of the experience of who they are. Crisis brings risk and opportunity, just like traumatic experience is risk and opportunity. The risk is people get hurt. The opportunity is they get to know themselves in a different way. Maybe they leave behind people that weren't healthy for them. They find better practices on a day-to-day basis that deepen the capacity of who they are. And we don't want people to go through traumatic experiences, but historically and currently, we know that traumatic experiences are going to happen to people based on sort of the plight of humanity. And so when we know that, then we're looking at the restorative, the ecology of trauma and healing. Is there are so many different dimensions to it, and how do we gift in and bring to and honor what people need? And that they will never not undo what has happened, but they will become more because of what has occurred with the healing and the processes that they enter into.
I think there's a lot of resemblance between the trauma healing work that we talk about and grief and loss work. There's kind of this construct within grief and loss that talks about shifting a narrative as well, but from moving on from something we've lost to moving forward. So like you're kind of mentioning that traumatic experience and the impact it has becomes part of the story. So really honoring that and honoring the experience and the pain that comes with it and then growing with it versus that's something to push down and forget about and I have to get on with my life.
Yeah, it goes to that terminology, post-traumatic growth, right? Which is about growing with. Same as grief. Grief is growing with the loss of the person, the experience. Around all traumatic experience, there is a loss. There's a grief process in there. The person that you were before. The innocence could be lost around certain experiences. The capacity of who you are to relate to the world in a way that you aren't as hypervigilant, or that it's changed how you see the world, right? That sometimes there can be a naivety pre a traumatic experience that may not happen to me, or, those things are further away from me. But, a lot of traumatic experiences, we will all experience something, and some are closer than we think, right? So post-traumatic growth is about that change, that restorative process. You live with the traumatic experience, you live in the healing, and it always lives with you, right? Just as grief and loss, you always live with the grief process, but it becomes different over time. The loss never goes away. The loss has happened. It changes our state of experience.
And I like what you said earlier about learning to manage the burdens and the impact versus the experience itself.
Yeah, as I move forward with my work and writing and research, I've got a couple books, like a series. So the first book will be The Many Faces of Trauma, really looking at prevalence, because I've done a lot of prevalence work, developed screening tools, sat within prevalence a lot in some of my direct work. My second book is called The Burden of Silence, or The Space of Silence, and it's where the burden sits. Like, what is that impact, right? What are the stories not always heard, but that impact and how people work through the healing of impact. And if we don't recognize impact, we can't heal impact. It won't work as effectively, or the restorative piece isn't as deep and probably as profound as what people will need, depending on what has happened. And then the final piece of work I'm going to write on is the hope, healing, and the role of self-determination. So when you think of any sort of restorative and healing practice, there's like a legacy in it. It's an ongoing, it's till the end of a story. And the story then, accumulates and goes into other stories, because whatever healing's been done will be used to help others heal. And then that will be used to help others heal. And yet there's an ongoing process in any restorative work.
You spoke a bit about this earlier, Dr. Miller, about the aspect of healing that some people might have a sense that there's a pressure to heal quickly, so the timeline, but there really is no timeline. What can you say about this idea that people think it should be a speedy recovery and they should get back to a normal state of functioning and they should do this or should do that?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think like all impact and all suffering, none of us want to sit in suffering for too long. We all have a capacity to be with suffering, and then at some point we would like to return to some sort of other normal, which might be, just more peaceful, maybe joyful, maybe, something that doesn't seem so hard and difficult. So within that, right, is this idea of, how do we not necessarily just slow down, but incorporate, right, that this suffering, this burden, this impact, and we bring in some of those healing responses with people that care about us. That can take time, and that's days, months, years sometimes. And no one signs up probably for a few years project of wanting to be in a lot of suffering, or maybe they do, but a lot of people would say no. And yet around traumatic impact, it can take years and a lifetime. You live with that healing across the lifespan. And we talked about that earlier. Depending on developmental trauma, that impact carries across the lifespan. And so, in it, people want some relief. And we, want to work towards that. How do we reduce some of that suffering, especially in some of the acute and urgency to bring down that suffering, but then also holding space that it may be with us for quite some time. And what do we do to honor, right, that suffering and bring in more care, but also holding space that sometimes that burden is just heavy. And that's where you'll sometimes see practices that bring people together on the day, let's say, of something significant that's occurred, to honor all the people that went through that. And every year we honor them, right? And that can help people know they're not alone in the suffering. And so that's that restorative process, that it takes a community to help people heal or to support people in their healing, and not to forget those that have gone through experiences. And some people will never get, kind of a ceremonial recognition, like you think about veterans, and how we honor just those veterans that have passed and those that are still living, or those that have passed in relation to war trauma, but veterans that are still living in our National Remembrance Day yearly celebration and honoring of just all of the people that need to be honored, and family members. But there are many people that have suffered in many other ways that don't get that sort of honoring, that suffering is recognized. So, I always say there's many components to say that healing takes a lifetime, and healing takes a community of support, and healing takes so many different responses. And, and to enter into that with the person or people that we are working with as much as possible.
I really liked how you said that these individuals will carry the healing with them for a lifetime, versus talking about carrying the impact or carrying the pain for a lifetime. It's another example of how individuals we can walk alongside individuals to help to change a narrative that it's a very long timeline, very long process that can take a lifetime, but it can be a process of healing versus a process of managing pain or reliving the trauma.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because I think in healing there's more hope, right? There's more resiliency than if we think about carrying the burden of and the pain and the suffering. But we do need to recognize that it's there, because if you don't recognize it, it's like minimizing it. Mm-hmm. So we don't want to maximize something at the expense of minimizing something, but we do want to recognize that healing is across a lifespan, which then gives people, usually there's a sense of hope and resiliency in that.
Right. It's kind of this, what we're speaking to here is really the latter half of the work. We've kind of spoken throughout the series about the complexities and the layers that come with trauma, and that's really speaking to the truth, acknowledging the impact, identifying the evocative cues, and everything kind of in between there. And then kind of with the healing process is a positive psychology lens where we're emphasizing post-traumatic growth mindsets.
Yes. And that within that, it's like you're leading a beacon. Sometimes like there is some, beacon of light in that people believe in healing. So we believe in hope, that we want to hope, and that we want to acknowledge resiliency in our, humanity, in our world in general. There is like a light then when things can be very dark for people around what they're going through. And I think it's important that we do bring light, that we do bring that language, that we do bring that acknowledgement and maybe those psychological shifts, right? So that people can lean in and know that there is a way through this. And that healing across a lifespan means that we prepare to heal. That it's like sometimes we don't know what we're preparing for. And yet to prepare to heal means we're preparing to find our own agency, our resiliency, that growth piece. And that there are ways to prepare. Because think of, if you take preparing into, just some baseline, like if you prepare to get ready for your day, you have a process that you're going to go into so you can enter into your day. If we prepare to heal, it means we're looking to, resources or information or services or, opportunities to enter into something that will help us continue, to help us, get into some sort of restorative process that will help us, right, to move forward or to move with some of the pain and suffering, but in a more, empowered way with vitality to want to continue.
I was thinking about some of the languaging that's around healing and trauma, and I actually think that I've said it within the traumatology series itself as well, but the word recovery. And I was just kind of reflecting on the connotation behind that. And part of it to me says that recovery, you're trying to get back to a sort of baseline, or you're trying to get back to a norm or an old version of yourself. And I think that it can be better replaced with the word healing, because with with trauma, it's becomes a part of an individual's story. And so it becomes almost, the traumatic event is almost like a wound. And so with the work that can happen with the self-determination of how one can improve, that wound can begin to heal over. But at the end of the day, I think there's still a scar there. And that's kind of the process that we're talking about here, is healing that means learning a lifetime and a journey of vitality and empowerment. So I think maybe instead of using that word recovery, that healing is a little bit more fitting, because it just really entails a level of improving where you're at now with a scar that still might be left behind, as someone still self-determines how to live with what happened to them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the restorative, I think the language of restorative, if you think of restorative justice, is to really hold that impact and to bring together the people that have been impacted, and then to bring in all the resources that are needed to honor those people and to restore some sort of justice, right, in the community. And of course, that's an Indigenous teaching and a model used. But I think the practice of restorative, right, is to restore some of that vitality, the change, right, in the person based on the impact, is to find who they are in their vitality as they move forward and continue to heal. And so there is a change in who they are. But it doesn't mean it's all bad, but there's an impact which can be difficult, but they can find within themselves, right, to restore that self-determination. I mean, think of the Invictus Games and some of those stories, if you've ever watched any of the movie around the Invictus Games, and I know on Netflix they have a really good series, but to restore, right, to find like that phoenix rises into what power do I have now to determine myself in this sport and this capacity, no matter what those limitations are and the wounds that I carry. It's very profound and powerful. Everyone has that right to restore, to find, to rebuild. and to go through the grief and loss of the person they were, and to enter in with strength to the person they become and will continue to become as they continue in that healing journey across the lifespan.
As we bring Traumatology series to a close, I think we've seen a lot of themes around the importance of human connection and how that can be a really crucial piece to people's healings, not just healing through a therapeutic process within an office with a healthcare professional, a mental health care professional, but even just connecting to people in their community can be a therapeutic process and have therapeutic value itself. We've talked about kind of the switching to a mindset of post-traumatic growth and how resilience and vitality and self-determination play a huge role in that. We've also really, I think, exhausted or just kind of opened the lid to how many layers and complexities there are to the concept of trauma, whether that's traumatic experiences themselves, the impact on the body, or just kind of the multifaceted nature of them and how they can compound as well. What are you hoping that our listeners have gotten from listening to this series and can really take home with them, whether they've experienced traumatic experiences themselves or are looking to work with individuals in a trauma work capacity, or are just looking to support people in their community who have experienced trauma?
Yeah, that, I feel like I could go on for hours if I could, but I can't. Yeah. That's a good thing. So I think every life matters, right? And to be able to be very intentional with your work, if you're entering into some sort of education, work, building some sort of capacity, and to consider the trauma-focused, trauma-oriented care and knowledge building. That if every life matters, that the fundamental right of all humans is to be in this world and to be respected and to be safe. So you need to take that into every interaction that you have with people that you're going to work on behalf of, and yourself included. You have to give that to yourself in order to give it to others. And I think that becomes part of the journey too, that if people have gone through something, you have to go back in and do your own healing. And as you bring yourself into your work and you hold that right of your right to be safe and to be respected and to know yourself and to know what you don't know about yourself, so that when you enter into your work, you can seek to give that to your people that you're working on behalf of. So you haven't given it to yourself, it'll be hard to give it to others. So there is a bit of self-work to do, and to honor what you've gone through, and to honor the healing that you are in and will continue to be in your own, lived experience, and then creating space for that with the people that you are working on behalf of. And to, build in as much as you can practices that come from that standpoint of trauma-focused care and cultural sensitivity, and that power with the shared power, and then seeking, as, I deeply now know through the research and sort of all the accumulation of work I've done across the years and the education, and I've had incredible opportunity to, think with people and be with people in their healing, and to heal with people and communities, and not just individuals and educators, and, it's an incredible journey to be a human in the world when you get opportunity to be a part of things that are there to help people to heal and to honor and respect, people in their individual journeys. So to know that focus, right? If you're really going into something, everyone has the right to be safe and to be respected. And then how do you build in from there? And to find knowledge that supports you to develop that capacity to give to, but also to give to yourself, right? And I think takeaways, like maybe small moments of just understanding that shared power, and that all violence is about power and control. So if you go in with too much of an expert-only stance, you might miss opportunities, right, to look at that power dynamic and hurt people in not wanting to know who they are, because you hold the your expert knowledge on the backside. You enter into the relationship to see the person, right? And then I think the continued growth around healing is to see it as a lifetime journey, and that every human has the potential and possibility to heal from whatever it is they've gone through. And when you've done enough of this work and, doing a lot of impact work, I do a lot of assessment around impact and understanding it and kind of building in what people will need or communities need, or, what do we need to do to build better resources. You see and know the horrific that can happen. And it changes who you are as a practitioner. It changes who you are as a person. You don't see the world in the same way as you did before when you know a lot around some of the social atrocities and, some of the things that people have to go through in the most difficult moments. But you also see the other side of it, the capacity for the human spirit to come through that. And you hold some of that self-determination yourself. Right, to enter into that and let people know they're not alone, and that you can walk in whatever that part of the journey is, or educate and provide information so others can walk with people through some of those really difficult times. Because it is about hope building when you do this work, that we can get through things.
Right. And if you yourself don't see the hope and the potential in the person that you're sharing that experience with, then it's hard to instill that in someone else as well.
That's right. Yes.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Dr. Miller. I have learned a lot, so I appreciate you sharing your wealth of knowledge and experience with myself. And we just want to thank everyone for listening, and hopefully you've broadened your understanding of trauma, whether you're looking to get into this line of work or whether you're looking for tools to support yourself or others. We appreciate you listening.
Thank you so much, Rebecca. It's been great to spend this time with you and all of your good questions and seeking to understand. And, I wish you well in your work, and I thank everyone for taking the time to watch this, and I hope it helps. And I hope it provides you with some information that allows you to be in your own burdens and or to help those with their burdens in a more hopeful way. Thank you.
Thanks.